Right.
And we'll get to it like this. What were your expectations for a 30th anniversary Power Rangers long? I wouldn't necessarily say it's a movie because it's not like 90 minutes, but it is like I would say it's like longer than 2 episodes. So what were your expectations?
I've been calling it a network special. I think is the closest thing to my expectations for this was really, so this is not their fault in the slightest, but it was almost outdated before it came out due to the loss of Jason David Frank. Not that he was in it necessarily, but the whole thing is obviously geared towards the loss of the Yellow Ranger, which happened in like 2002. So that's old news, not to be harsh about it, but like that's something we've known about as a fandom for a long time. And they beautifully, I felt, crafted this around really the first Power Ranger we've ever lost as like humans. So I thought that was great. But the fact that, like, I don't know the exact timeline, but I'd say Jason David Frank, we probably lost him like a month and a half, maybe 2 months before this came out. So it made it a little emptier for me. I know I'm not directly answering your question quite yet, but like it warped my expectations a lot because I knew I wasn't going to get what we were all hoping at that moment, which was a tribute for him. Not to take away that we didn't want one that we got, but like it definitely hampered it. I know I didn't before any of that happened because I don't know the timeline of when this was created, but we heard about it for a long time. I'm saying there's like a 2-3 year, rumor mill for this, I'll call it. So I was hoping, I didn't want, because obviously the technology's there that you could CGI everything and overdo it over the top, and like part of Power Rangers' charm is its cheesiness, and it still needed to have that. If they tried to remove all the cheesiness, I don't know how much I would have enjoyed it. Because spoiler alert here, like I did really enjoy this because of the cheesiness that was in it, and it was a little more serious than most, but to no fault of their own, I do think that like expectations of this had to be warped because of what happened in the real world just before it came out.
Yeah, I would say, I think the original timeline was, I don't remember when they announced this was coming out, but I remember the big announcement was like September, or September or August, which was when most of the stuff about this show was like, I wouldn't say the trailers, but I would say like a lot of information on Facebook was popping up and Twitter. And I think Jason David Frank passed away in November. Personally, when it comes to Power Rangers, I kind of level my expectations to the point where I'm thinking to myself, this is something that's made for kids now. This is an entity that's made for, we were kids when this came out. When we were kids, we thought that the show was amazing and it was completely flawless, but it comes to the point where when we look back and we think to ourselves, these actors were not treated well. The show made so much money off the back of these actors to the point where some of them had to quit in order to have a better lifestyle or well-being. We've learned that production wasn't necessarily nice to certain actors. There's been an exchange of ownership of the rights of the show between Saban and Disney, and then Saban again, and now Hasbro.
Yeah.
And it's to the point where, like, we know that a 30th anniversary special is going to mostly be for the adults, but it's also, like you said, it's going to have that cheesiness factor and those callbacks that are going to make us remember our childhood. So I kind of came into this thinking to myself, like, it's probably not like going to be an Academy Award winning movie. It's not going to be one of those things where, normal people look back on and they say to themselves, oh, well, did you see that Power Rangers movie? No, it's mostly just for the people who grew up watching it when they were like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old in the early 90s. And, maybe that's something you want to see with your kids if they were also a fan of the show.
Right. And it's not something like I was following when it came out. I didn't necessarily run to it the second it came out either. I watched it maybe like a week later. And as we know, we're very late on the review of this. Most people that cover this sort of thing, this is almost old news at this point. But here we are. Such is life. But I didn't, like you said, I didn't expect it to be an award-winning piece. A straight to Netflix thing I thought was the safest thing to do, because if you try to make a 30th anniversary movie or even another show that more caters to the older, Rangers, let's call them, for this, like that would be this was like a no risk, high reward thing. Because if it falls flat, it's like, all right, yeah, they try to do a reunion and it is what it is. So like if I gave this like a B minus, let's say, which I think would be like a fair grade, I think that's a success for it being a Netflix special. I think if it was like when Hasbro made the movie in like 2017, I thought it was a really good kickstart to like a rebrand. And like my wife, who was not a Power Ranger fan, we watched it like a year ago when I fell down one of my Ranger rabbit holes. She knew enough about it to know what Power Rangers were and watched the movie. And, that movie has like a cliffhanger in the post credits.
It does.
Which I thought was beautifully done. And she looked at me and was like, "You're telling me they never made a second one of these? Like it's right there." And I'm like, "No, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't know if it didn't make the money. I know the movie didn't make the money, but I thought the toys did, which was always the plan. So I feel like they kind of dropped the ball on a modernization there. So that's how we end up like, had that gone better, I think the 30th anniversary movie would have been Power Rangers 2, Rise of the Green Ranger, or something like that. But we didn't get that, so we got something like this.
Because we all remember the last scene of that movie is they're like, Tommy Oliver, and nobody's sitting in his chair. And
there's a green jacket on the chair. Yeah. Which is great. Perfect. Awesome. And I don't know who they were going to cast. And I remember hearing rumors of like Cole Sprouse, but this was before Riverdale like took off. So I don't think they could have afforded him by the time that happened. But I do remember that being one of the small rumors there. But like, it's a small detour, but like, what did you feel of that movie? Did you feel like it merited a sequel?
I mean, I thought it did at the very end. I was like, there's going to be a sequel. Like, what kind of movie do they? I don't really see very many movies where they're kind of pressing on a sequel and they're like, psych, we're not actually going to make one.
Yeah.
I thought that movie was good enough to make a sequel. Of course, like, again, not an Academy Award winning movie, but like mostly fan service. And I feel like despite the fact that Power Rangers is a relatively like older entity, it's either geared towards kids or it's geared towards adults who watched it as a kid. I feel like it's something that you could get people to watch because, again, Bryan Cranston was in it as Zordon. It had a few actors that I did recognize, but I mean,
the Red Ranger was on like Stranger Things. I remember.
The Yellow Ranger was in the Yellow Ranger. I remember she was in this one movie with Mark Wahlberg where they play foster parents and she plays one of the foster kids, I think.
Okay.
That's what I specifically remember her from.
And I also liked with the movie, before we shift out of the movie, like it was different enough. Like the backstory was different enough. Like Rita was the original Green Ranger, which it would explain why she had the power coin, which is where that would have went. And, why Zordon's stuck in the tube is a different story. And the whole, like, you got to bond with your power coin before you can morph. That wasn't really a thing, but it made sense for what they did. So to me, it was different enough to be like a whole alternate. We love our multiverses in 2023. It would have been the perfect multiverse for what Power Rangers is, in my opinion.
Exactly. And I think I might add before we get into the bulk of this. Just made a pun there. Anyway, before we get into the meat and potatoes of this, Phil originally, I don't know how this came up, but I think you originally came to me and you were like, hey, do you want to do kind of like a crossover review of the movie when it comes out? And I was like, I got a bunch of projects going on.
Right.
Maybe we'll get to this in the early summer. So much piled on top of me that I was like, man, I don't think I'm going to be able to write a script that I'm going to have you read. I think I'm just going to do a stream and just edit it or record something and edit it down, because I think that is going to be something that is going to be a lot easier for me to do, because all I have to do is the editing work. I don't have to write a script or anything like that. I felt like that was just much easier because summer is ending and I've got other stuff to do during the year. Let's just shift this over and get this done.
Yeah, I don't know how well I would have done reading and that's no like talk on like your ability to write a script. I'm talking about my ability to read a script. So I think you went with the right move of just doing it on the fly like this. So I think good call by you.
And it's great to see you in the command center, right?
Yeah, for those that follow my channel, like I'm still building my office back up after a hurricane we had last year. Wasn't quite ready for this, so I just called Zordon. He said, "Yeah, Alpha will leave the door open for you, and you can just do it through there." So, and you got in the Megazord, so we're where we need to be right now.
He didn't give you any sort of, you can't enter the command center without a power coin.
Yeah, he had to leave one under the map.
Which, by the way, in the show's history, multiple characters entered the command center without a power coin. So that just goes right out the window.